What's up, everybody? Welcome to Take No Offense. A couple of old friends who grew up together in Pennsylvania and now live on opposite sides of the country, getting together to share our thoughts on politics, sports, movies, and TV. I'm Eric Messersmith in the Los Angeles area, Brian Johnson in suburban Washington, D.C. What's up, buddy?
What's up, my dude? Happy Monday.
Yes, a new week, a new program. I think this is episode 5 or 6 now of the reboot. We're
That
really
sounds right
rolling.
to me. 5 or 6.
5, 6, somewhere in that neighborhood. Last week we talked a little bit about the Trump trial and the
Yeah.
aftermath there. We've got another trial involving Biden, Hunter Biden this time. So that trial, when we're recording this on Monday, it's gone to the jury. No verdict yet, although I suspect we will have one soon. I think he's likely to be found guilty. What are your thoughts on this trial? Do you care? Does it matter at all? It's the lead story on every newscast, even though Hunter Biden is a private citizen, right?
Well, he's also the president's son.
Well, there's
So
that too.
there's that angle that you could go with. And I don't know if you've heard, but Hunter Biden, he's a lightning rod for um anti-government conspiracy theories, et cetera, down the line. So I can see why he's in the news. Do I personally care? No, because I mean he doesn't really have a role in government. Um So I don't see why it's significant from that standpoint, but I understand why it's important in the importance the wrong word. I understand why it's popular in the zeitgeist.
Yeah, I think I have two thoughts on this beyond just kind of the trial itself, which, as you mentioned, in and of itself is not really that big of a deal. Look, again, I'm not critical of the news coverage. I agree with everything you said. Obviously, it should be covered. Obviously, it is an interesting story and a
Sure.
big story. But I have two general thoughts. The first is this, to me, I have similar feelings than the as I did with the Trump trial for the hush money. I think Hunter Biden did it, just like I think
Yeah.
Trump did it.
Yeah.
I think he will be found guilty, just like Trump was found guilty. But I am a little bit skeptical, just like in the Trump hush money trial, of whether the case should even have been brought in the
Yeah.
first place.
Okay. We're
Because
on the same page. What a surprise.
yeah, like the criminal justice system is made up of two separate, yet equally important. No, but in all seriousness, the criminal justice system is about not just if somebody committed a crime, because lots of people commit lots of crimes all the time. We have prosecutorial discretion for a reason, because we have limited time, we have limited resources,
Yeah.
we have limited prison space. And so it's very important that prosecutors, that's why they have such, important positions, is because they make these calls on the margin. And I think both the Trump trial and this trial were marginal cases to begin with. Like in the Hunter Biden case, did he buy a gun under the influence of drugs? Most likely. However, he had the gun for 11 days. It was never used. It was found in a dumpster. It happened years ago. It's essentially, checking a line on a form for a weapon that was never used for a guy who was going through at that time in his life a terrible addiction. So
Yeah,
do
he's
I
a
think
drug
it's a
addict.
huge deal? No. Similarly with the Trump trial, although I do think some of Trump's other trials are much more serious and there's a much stronger case that they should have been brought. The hush money trial to me was the weakest case because it depended on kind of a novel legal theory. And again, that doesn't mean Trump didn't do it. That doesn't mean it wasn't important, because it was before the 2016 election and it was a form of election interference, but it was 7 years ago. They were misdemeanors for changing the book. So that's kind of my first point, is I have similar feelings about this trial as I did with Trump's trial. My second point is this trial and kind of Hunter Biden's legal mess in general should put to rest this idea that there's lawfare being waged by the Biden administration against Donald Trump and Merrick Garland. Like, think about how interesting it is that the president's own son is far, far more likely to be in prison before the election than the president's opponent. Like, if you were really trying to rig the justice system, you would have your opponent in jail and not your own son. Biden has not only has not intervened to stop charges against his own son. He said he will not pardon his son. And as I
That's
said, this is
crazy
a
to me.
well, who knows?
Dude, I would pardon my son. I would basically, dude, if I was president, I'd be like Trump. I'd be like up there, like sham trial, fake news. I'd pardon him immediately. I don't know what that
Well,
says about me. I'm just saying, like, I mean, come on, man.
look, I respect it for Biden, and I will say this caveat: if he loses the election and Hunter Biden's sitting in prison,
Yeah,
who knows, right? If it's like January, 19th next year, and Biden's about to leave, maybe he issues a last minute pardon to his son. I would not rule that out. But I like the fact I don't think he should, to be clear. I like the fact that he's saying he won't. And also it's important to remember, like, Bob Menendez, a Democratic senator from New Jersey, is on trial right now for bribery. There's a Democratic congressman in Texas, Henry Cuellar, who's facing charges. So this idea that somehow the Justice Department is rigged against Donald Trump, when the only case that's gone to trial, the case he was convicted on a few weeks ago, is not even a federal case. That has nothing to do with the Biden administration or Merrick Garland. So the
right.
whole argument, this case is yet another example to undermine that ridiculous argument that Donald Trump and his supporters constantly make, that somehow he's just this, law-abiding citizen going about his business, never towing the line of the law. And then all of a sudden, here comes evil Merrick Garland and Joe Biden cooking up a plot to put him in prison. Like he's never done anything in his life that, might land his ass in prison. So those are my thoughts on on kind of the larger role I think this fairly minor Hunter Biden trial plays.
Minor is the right word,
political.
because conflating these two trials and the multiple trials for Trump, I mean, I don't know, man. It would be like Michael Jackson going to trial in his prime in 1987 and Brian Johnson going on trial. Like they're so far apart in terms of their importance. I mean, one is a former president of the United States who like made policy that like impacted literally billions of people in the world. And the other is just a kid of a president who was like on the board of Amtrak. Okay, cool. Like they're so, you get my point. I mean, I know it's a little hyperbolic, but like, again, I understand why it's important, but geez Louise, these are, I don't even know why they would be mentioned in the same breath, aside from their, politically connected, but in terms of name, but that's it.
Yeah, and look, I have my issues with Hunter Biden and the way he's conducted himself. I'm not even talking about addiction. Addiction's a terrible thing, but I mean selling access or the perception of access, using his
I'm
name
not here
to
saying
enrich
he's a
himself.
good guy.
Right? No, I know you're not, but I want to be clear. But this case is not about that. This case is about a guy who filled out a check the box on a form for a gun he had for 10 days and was never used. I just think probably not that big of a deal.
I feel like in both these cases, there's a lot of the OJ effect going on. And what I mean by that is OJ famously was acquitted of murder, then found guilty in civil court. And then, he committed, an armed robbery, and they're like, 20 years, where normally basically what you get what I'm saying, right? Is like,
right.
His penalty wasn't just for that crime that he committed.
Yeah.
His penalty was for all the other things that he got away with. And I feel that especially with Trump, maybe a little less so with Hunter Biden, but especially with Trump, I do feel like there is some of that going on where they're like, we couldn't nail you for the million other things you've done wrong, but we got you now for this hush money payment. So here you go.
It's like getting Al Capone for tax evasion, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
thing.
It's like, no, that's a great point about Trump, because that's kind of how I feel. It's especially with this case. Again, probably shouldn't have been brought, although I think that is questionable, but he's guilty. And that's kind of my general feeling is this man has conducted himself in a way, Donald Trump I'm talking about, in his personal life, his business life, his political life, that has been reckless, that has been haphazard, that has been dishonest. And he has done that throughout his entire life.
Yeah, and that's you being kind.
Right.
I would frame that differently, but sure.
Right. I'm trying to be as fair, skating the boundaries of decency, of legality in everything he's done. I mean, look at the E. Jean Carroll defamation suit. Look at the cheating on wife after wife with the next wife.
Dude,
look
Trump
at the fact
stakes. Trump University.
Trump University. The massive suit, another thing he claims was a witch hunt, where in civil court his company was hit with massive penalties for essentially business fraud, for over and undervaluing and overvaluing assets for years. all of that stuff.
Eric,
And
that's
not
just how business is conducted. You don't know.
well, that's right. That's what he says. And not that we're not even getting into anything he did as president January 6th trying to overturn the election. My point is when you behave like that consistently for a long enough period of time, I lose sympathy for you when a borderline case goes against you.
That's what
You
I
see
was
what I
driving
mean?
at. Yeah.
Like if you had conducted yourself as an upstanding citizen in your business life and your personal dealings as a politician, and you were just an honest, decent human, and then a marginal case comes along that ends up with you going to prison, I'm a lot more likely to be like, hold on a second. Like this is a guy or gal who conducts themselves in a really upfront, honest way. And this is a really marginal thing. And you're going to, potentially put them in jail for that. Come on. But with Trump, it's more like, well, you got away with so much stuff over such a period of time.
You really been taking advantage.
Right. It's hard for me to summon up a marginal case breaking against you. It's hard for me to summon outrage for that. All right, Brian, I wanted to hit on this real quick. You and I have talked about the Israel-Palestine thing on here in regards to protests and the war. Well, this weekend, we saw that daring raid where Israel was able to rescue 4 hostages in Gaza. And there was a lot of casualties. The Palestinian Authority, who knows how accurate that is, they say almost 300 Palestinians were killed. And I thought that was interesting for a few reasons. First of all, still no ceasefire deal, even though the U.S. and now the United Nations, as of today, and Israel, apparently, we think, are all supporting the ceasefire deal, but Hamas at this moment is not. That obviously is the best way to get these hostages out, because that would result in no deaths, and you would eventually get all of them back. But that said, until that happens, if I'm Israel and I have good intelligence, as they clearly did, that hostages are alive and I know where they're at and I think I can get them out, I'm going in to get them out. I think that's what a government owes its people. And it was so weird to me to see. And again, I want to try to be fair when I say this, because I saw a lot of criticism of the raid to get the hostages back because of the innocent Palestinians that were killed. And some were. We don't know how many, because again, who knows how much we can trust the Hamas-run Ministry of Health. But no question, some innocent people were killed. And I saw people online saying, well, how can you justify getting 4 hostages back when 200 plus people were being killed? And I don't think that's that many people that believe that. I really don't. So I don't want to be overly critical and make it out to be like that's a cry of a lot of people. But I do think there is a significant number of people in this country and others that believe that and similar things. And it makes me want to take my head and slam it into the wall. You had a terrorist group that killed innocent people on October 7th, took hundreds more hostage, refuses to give them back, refuses to do a ceasefire deal, hides them among civilians, tortures them, and then we're supposed to think that Israel shouldn't go in and try to get them. I just can't believe I don't know how your mind gets warped in a way that you believe that, is what I'm trying to say. And had people believed that in prior conflicts, like we had the anniversary of D-Day, the 80th anniversary of D-Day. If you studied World War II history, a lot of innocent people died in World War II. We did not have precision guided bombs in World War II. We carpet bombed Germany, killed innocent people by the thousands, not to mention what was done in Japan. And if these same people were alive and at today, or if they had social media then, and these same people they would be, I don't know, Hitler might have never left. Like Hitler might have been able to stay in power. Like they may have been able to convince enough people that it just wasn't worth the cost. Do you see? So I don't want to overstate it and say it's a ton of people, but I just saw that and I'm thinking, if you think that Israel shouldn't go get its citizens who are being held hostage, I just think you're lost.
The big sigh is because I'm going to do a George Bushism, which means I'm not going to get it exactly right, but I'm going to be in the ballpark, like the fool me once, shame on thing that he did. But basically, there's a saying about liberals that or any person, like they want hard justice until it's them, and then they're a good person. Basically, meaning like when you're outside of the situation, when you're outside of the scenario, it's very easy to have judgments and say what you would or wouldn't have done. You know, it's like a military thing. Like any guy that I ever met is like, well, if this would have happened to me, I would have done this. I immediately knew I wanted nothing to do with them because they were probably going to be a coward who hid behind a tree. I want the guy who just doesn't say anything because I know that guy knows exactly what he's doing. I digress to say that what if it was your wife or your brother or your family member that was held hostage? Would the amount of lives lost, would that matter to you? I bet you the situation would be a lot different. So, not to split hairs with you, but the one thing I disagree with is I do think there is a calculus that goes into this. Like, how many innocent civilians are going to die to rescue 4 hostages? Because I guess my reply to be, and just to be a little defensive, though, for a second would be the number that I'm seeing is 274. Well, what if it's 1,274? What if it's 2,074? What if it's 10,074? Is it worth those 4 hostages? Like, no, man, we gotta like clearly there's a line in the sand somewhere, and Israel's line in this particular case was 274. So they like, and let's just take it at that number and like say it was accurate because we know Hamas's strategy. We've been over it many times on this show. Like, yes, they're using civilians. Like, this is what they do. It's how they gain sympathy from these people who are saying like it wasn't worth that calculated risk that they made. I don't know, man. Part of me is like, I kind of respect the way Israel is going about this in a lot of ways. They finally got, and we talked about this in I think our very first episode, is that yes, Israeli citizens died and it's tragic and this terrible thing happened, but there have been people in Israel that have been waiting for a moment like this for decades. They've been waiting for the green light, and now the green light is here and they're doing it. Part of me respects that. I'd be interested to hear what you think, but I really, that's been my perspective the entire time. I think Israel's like, what are you going to do? We're going for it. We're going to take them out and we don't care. This is what's going to happen.
Well, it's interesting because a lot of people will tell you that that's not what Israel's doing, that Israel's being held back in part by the United States. A lot of critics in the American right believe that. I think the truth, as usual, is somewhere in the middle. Look,
you're right.
I think if there were, so for instance, imagine 2 worlds. Imagine a world where there is zero international pressure, that the United Nations, there's no protests in America. There's no United Nations getting angry. There's no Joe Biden leaning on Benjamin Netanyahu. Nothing. What would Israel do in that circumstance? I mean, you could imagine.
That's an interesting question.
You could imagine a different scenario. I mean, look, I think Israel
maybe, but I don't know is the answer.
I think Israel's taken a lot of pains to avoid civilian casualties. Has it been enough?
They always have. Always.
That's true.
Always.
Has it been enough? Probably not. I mean, look, and that's where I give Biden a lot of credit to lean on them to be like, hey, guys, we need to, because to your point, I think you do. I want to be clear. I'm not saying you ignore civilian casualties or potential civilian casualties. I think you have to. And the IDF, from what I understand, does in all their calculations take that into consideration.
Of course they do. That's why I was saying that was an obvious thing.
Right. But as you know, when you give the green light for this operation, you don't know the exact number of people that will die. And the question is it worth trying to get? You have a pretty
good idea.
Well, you might, but is it worth trying to get your hostages out? I think the answer to that is yes, if you know where they are and you think you could do it safely.
Well, I was all over the place, but you get my original statement. If that's your family member, who cares?
Yeah, no, you're right. I think, look, Israel's in a really tough spot right now. I think the Biden administration pretty much has the right playbook on it, which is kind of to thread that needle of Hamas needs to be dealt with, but we need to do everything we can to try to pressure Israel to get humanitarian aid in there and avoid, to the extent they can, or they're willing to, civilian casualties. And I think that's the right way to do it. And look, it is working. It is working. Civilian casualties have been way down, and the Israeli government is finally bowing to some pressure to have a ceasefire deal. And we'll see if they follow through on it or not. Benny Gantz, who was in the war cabinet, resigned yesterday because he wants Netanyahu well, first of all, he wants to be the next prime minister and he wants to beat Netanyahu in the polls, but also he wants Netanyahu to accept the deal. And he's trying to pressure him to make the Netanyahu government accept that deal and try to establish some type of plan for the day after, which is my biggest critique with Israel. Like, I'm more on the side of the war's worth it. And although I feel terrible for any innocent people that are killed, I think in general, Israel has done what they've needed to do. My critique of Israel isn't the war itself. It's more the fact that
strategy.
they don't have a plan to get out of it. Because a war that ends and then doesn't change any of the circumstances on the ground in terms of how Gaza is governed, how the Palestinian people are governed, and how they legitimately have a path forward to a state, how they're given hope. If you don't have that plan in place, then the war really isn't worth it. It might accomplish a short-term objective, but we'll be right back in the spot in 6 months, a year, 2 years. That's my main critique of Netanyahu, and why I've said before, I think he should go. I'm not a fan of Netanyahu.
I'm going to go completely off the reservation, so just forgive me in advance. But I do find historically, it is interesting where you have Ukraine and Russia. That's a war for territory. Like, Russia wants to occupy Ukraine. And historically, that makes sense. But if you think of most of the wars that have taken place post World War II, where Germany was trying to take territory and Italy was taking territory and, et cetera, ever since World War II ended, wars have not been for occupancy. They've not been imperialistic. They've been for control of a region. And my application here is to your point, where if you're not going to occupy Gaza and then maintain it after you've occupied it, what is the strategy?
Well, and the problem that Netanyahu has is that most of the people in his government, they want Israel to occupy Gaza. That's what they want, and the West Bank. They want that whole land to be run by Israel, and they don't.
You don't think that makes sense, though, just for what we're talking about right now? I'm not saying that that's what should happen. Look, whatever. I'm sure it's a much deeper. I know it's a much deeper conversation than that. But I'm saying, in order to achieve the best outcome, wouldn't that make the most sense? That Israel occupies Gaza and brings it in under the Israeli territory?
No, I don't think so. Because
really,
because
then what are we going to do? Oh, I want to hear this. Go ahead.
Look, the only solution in that region for the Israelis and Palestinians is to separate. You can't live in one state together. Israel will never be a democracy. Israel will just deteriorate down the road of anti-democratic practices if they do that.
But go ahead.
We're already seeing some of that in the West Bank with the settlers and the violence. And look, I'm not here to shill for Israel, even though I think they're right in this particular war. I think the Netanyahu government's a disaster because I think his government doesn't recognize the obvious truth, which is the only way to get what they want long-term is to work toward a two-state solution and giving the Palestinians a state of their own. And the way to do that is A, to eliminate Hamas, which is essential because you can't have a Hamas-run terror state. But then B, there has to be more than that. That doesn't get you where you need to go. That's just the first step. The next step then is, okay, if and when Hamas is gone, how do you work with the legitimate Palestinian factions who maybe are interested in peace, the Arab world, the United States, the UN, in order to build up the institutions so that you can have a Palestinian state someday? And that's where Netanyahu, because look, Netanyahu is kind of like Trump. He's got his own legal troubles as well. And staying in power keeps him away from those legal issues. And I think, and he's in a coalition with government with people who have no interest in a Palestinian state and have said as much. And he's in a tough spot in that regard. And so we'll see what he does. It's going to be really interesting. He's clearly, he has been putting off these decisions as long as possible and being as vague as possible. And now it's getting to the point where Biden and the UN and his own government with people in the Israeli politics like Benny Getz are finally starting to now put the pressure on and be like, okay, you have to decide now. Which way is it going to be? Are you going to go with your hard right government and essentially shut off a future peace process? Or are you going to break from them and maybe lose the government and have to have new elections? And we'll see. We'll see what Netanyahu does. I hope he does the right thing because, like I said, there's no question for Israel's long-term security. It's the only answer. Not only is it better for the Palestinian people, but it's better for Israel long-term because this doesn't work. It has never worked. The Israelis and Palestinians living in the same territory that's all controlled by Israel. It doesn't work. It doesn't work now. It hasn't worked in the past. It will never work.
I'm good, man. I was just kind
All
of
right.
playing devil's advocate there.
Yeah, no, I love it. It's always look, it's one of those subjects that I don't think we're going to solve.
Yeah, it's not going to
tonight.
be solved. Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about, on a lighter note, the world of sports, Brian. We have Caitlin Clark in the news again. We talked about her last week. Now it's because Team USA this summer, the Olympic Games are in Paris, and she did not make the 12-member squad for Team USA. Are you outraged about this snub of Caitlin Clark?
Yeah, I don't get outraged about very much, and I especially don't get outraged about women's basketball. It's just not on my priority list of things that I care about. It is a little confusing, though, why she's not on the team, given what she has brought to that sport. I think that's a very fair question to ask. But to answer your question, no, I'm not outraged. It's like Shaquille O'Neal not making the team for the Dream Team. It's the same thing. Like, no one in their right mind thought that Christian Laettner was better than Shaq. I don't know why Shaq was left off that team, but I wasn't outraged by it. I assume that the women will win the gold, just like the Dream Team did. So she'll be on the next one.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is one of those things that, first of all, again, great for women's basketball that we're talking about it. Although probably not, probably not great that she won't be there to help promote them in the summer games. I think NBC's probably not happy about this.
No, probably not.
The sponsors.
That's who's the most disappointed out of everyone.
Yeah. Look, it makes sense to have her on the team from a commercial standpoint and an economic standpoint. But I will say, I don't follow women's basketball well enough to know if she is better than some of the players picked above her. I will say this. She missed the training camp that they had in Chicago.
Well, that's what I was going to drive at.
For good reason. She was in the Final Four. I think it's 9 of the 12 players have been on a USA basketball team before. So there's a lot of returning players from the team that's won. They've won every gold medal since 96 in Atlanta. And the one player that I've seen that people have kind of questioned over her is Diana Taurasi. Because remember, there's 12 spots.
For God's sakes, Diana Taurasi is like Bill Russell.
Right. And the thing about Taurasi is, yes, she's 42. Yes, she's not.
She has the same numbers as Clark.
Right, but her numbers in the WNBA are very similar. And if it's close, I think it's fair to give the edge to the woman who has won 5. I think she's either won 5 or I think she's won 5 going for 6. It might be 6 going for 7.
It's insane.
Because remember, part of it is you want to have people who have done this and been on this stage and have that kind of experience and leadership. So I'm perfectly fine with her being left off the team. She'll have her run starting 2028 here in LA, where I am with the next Olympics. She'll be the star of that team. So I think also it's probably good for her because she's coming off the Final Four of the national championship run right into the WNBA season. As we talked about last week, she's getting beat up a little bit.
Yeah,
physically. I mean, it'd be nice to have probably a little break for her. So I think it'll do her well. I find it hard to get too upset about it, but it seemed like a lot of people this really got a lot of people going on social media.
Well, I mean, whatever. I suspect you don't know the answer to this, but has anyone asked Caitlin Clark what she thinks about being left off the Olympic team?
They did. So I saw a clip the other day. She was very diplomatic in her answer. But her coach said that when Caitlin Clark found out, Clark texted the coach and basically said they've unleashed a dragon now or something to that effect.
Yeah.
Like, okay, I see this. I'm going to go kick ass now, which is what you would expect a great competitor to say,
sure,
especially in private. So I think she's handled it well. Speaking of basketball, NBA finals are underway. Celtics won the first 2 games at home. Game 1 was a blowout. Game 2 was close late, but they were able to pull it out. I've watched a little bit of it so far. I'm really having a hard time getting super engaged in these finals. What about you?
Well, I think the Celtics have just had such an easy path. And I don't mean to say they haven't been a great team. Like that's the hard part about this. If you're a fan, is that, the Celtics played the Heat without Jimmy Butler. They played the Cavs without Donovan Mitchell. They played the Pacers without Halliburton. And now they're in the finals and Kyrie looks like a shell of himself. Um, not that the Mavs are the first team since the 2010 Lakers to beat 50 plus win teams en route to the finals. They just have not been as sharp. I think with Boston, it's tough because I think anyone else who had only lost 2 games making this run and they're probably going to win the finals would be talked about as like this all-time great team. But you're really not hearing that chatter, I think, for all of the reasons that I outlined with the first thing that I said, is that they've just had such a air quote easy path. Like they really haven't faced any adversity at all.
Yeah.
Like, you haven't had to have a big shot at the end of the game. I mean, they're beating people by 10 plus points. I mean, I think the Celtics are going to win the championship. I think they're a deserving champion. I just think it's been kind of, as a fan, and I mean this purely as a fan, it hasn't been that exciting.
No, you're right. I mean, look, they won 64 games in the regular season. They dominated the Eastern Conference. I think they went 12-2 en route to getting to the finals. So now if you add these two, they're 14-2 in the postseason.
Yeah.
If assuming they win the series in 4 or 5 games or even 6 games, they're going to go down as one of the most dominant teams, certainly in the last 20 years, if not longer than that. But
you see what I'm saying? No one's going to care.
There are caveats. But I think it almost would have been better for their legacy if Giannis had been healthy and Lillard, because the Bucks were the team when right that had the star power to maybe challenge them. And that would have been a big, like if you could have imagined a path where they would have faced a healthy Embiid and the Sixers, a healthy Giannis and the Bucks, maybe a healthy Jimmy Butler and the Heat in the first round. If they had beaten those 3 teams or 2 of those 3 teams at top strength, I think we'd look at them completely different. And by the way, I think they would have beaten those teams at full strength. I mean, they are really fucking good.
Yeah.
That's
what I'm saying is hard about it. Is like, I don't want to take anything away from them because they're a great team. And to your point, I think they might have won those games anyway. They probably would have won those games just given how they, the regular season was a buzzsaw for them. I just think it's a little weird that given the amount of dominance that they had, that like people aren't going to, I don't think they will. I don't think they're going to give them the historical respect that they probably deserve for all the reasons that we outlined.
Yeah, you might be right. But I just think if you've watched this team and the way they execute and how good they are and how balanced they are, the eye test tells you they are a great team. Because like Luka may be the best player on the floor, but the Celtics have the next, it depends where you put Kyrie, but the Celtics have 5 of the next 6 best players. Like their starting 5 is, 4 of the starters plus Porzingis, who's coming off the bench now because he was injured. I mean, that is a dominant unit. And because of that depth, Dallas has to have Kyrie to have any shot, put up big numbers. Like Luka had 32, 11, and 11 on over 50% shooting. I mean, you can't really ask for much more playing 42 minutes. Like Kyrie has to give you minimum 25 and probably more like 30 or 35 in addition to Luka playing like that. Because as I mentioned, Boston has the advantage in depth. So you have to like if Kyrie doesn't do that, Dallas has no chance to even win a game.
The other thing is that defense isn't sexy. Like it doesn't sell. Like it just doesn't. We're looking for dunks and like Steph Curry and Kobe and like these amazing offensive players who hit these incredible shots. I mean, if you're just being honest about it as a casual fan, that's what a casual fan is attracted to. Jaylen Brown is a ridiculous defender.
Yes.
You know how many 3-pointers Kyrie Irving has made in the first 2 games of the series? 0. Not
wow,
one.
I did not know that.
No, he hasn't made a single 3-pointer yet in this series. He's over. It's because, Jaylen Brown has some weaknesses going to the left side. He's not a perfect offensive player, but all around, that dude is a monster. Like, he got $300 million for a reason. He's ridiculous.
That's what has impressed me so much about Boston in the games I've seen, because I'm kind of one of these people for a lot of playoff games, especially early rounds. I'll tune in for the last few minutes. And in some of their close games, they win it at the end, not with shot making necessarily, but with defensive plays. And you're right, Brown is the best. But the thing about Boston that makes them so good is it's not just him. I mean, Drew Holiday is an incredible
Horford
on-ball
blocking
defender.
Luka threes.
Horford, Porzingis blocking shots, and how about Jason Tatum at the other?
No, he's a really good.
He was
defender,
one-on-one with Kyrie, and he stripped him with under a minute or two left in the game the other night to help seal the win. It's a shame that you're right, because of circumstances outside of their control. They're probably not going to get the historical credit as an all-time great champion that they probably deserve. The way, of course, they can make up for that is, do it again next year. So we'll see. Right. We're already assuming they win, but I think it's pretty safe to assume at this point. All right, Brian, you have any reviews for us this week? Movies, TV shows, anything to share?
So on Saturday, I went to see the Garfield movie with my young children, and I could see you kind of laughing back there because, normally not up my alley. That's a fair assessment. But my young child, my young boy, he wanted to go see the Garfield movie. And were you a fan of Garfield as a kid?
Dude, when I was young, we used to have these like Scholastic kind of things where you'd go in and you'd buy pens and folders and stuff. They had Garfield folders.
Nice.
And I was obsessed with them. I would get everyone that came out with all the different characters. So the answer to the question is yes, of course.
Right.
I loved
I love Garfield. If you're not familiar with his work, he's not a big fan of Mondays. He has a lovable dog companion named Odie who does his bidding for him. John, his faithful owner. Anyway, it's Americana. Garfield is like Coca-Cola to me. It's outstanding. I read the comics when I was a kid. I watched Garfield and Friends. I loved all the specials. So I was actually really excited to go see this movie. And it has Chris Pratt, who, of course, he voices all these things now. He's voiced Lego movies. He's in Marvel movies, et cetera, et cetera. So I thought he would do a good job. Do you remember the Bill Murray Garfields?
I think I missed those
films. No, it was good because it's Bill Murray, and Bill Murray is magical in everything that he does. But anyway, dude, I was so disappointed. It was not good at all. And I was like, come on, man, it's Garfield. Like, just do your thing. I did. My only other comment on Garfield was kind of just a question for you is, for these classic things, do you like it when they just go in a completely different direction than like the original kind of construct? Or would you prefer as a viewer that they just kind of go with what they know? Because, and I asked that question because I really struggled with it with Garfield, because they like introduced his dad, which was never a character in any of the shows. He never existed. Samuel L. Jackson plays the father, Vic, and he does pretty good. But whatever. They didn't stick to the base material, which I was kind of like, man, this would have been so much better. I wish, because I want my kids to experience Garfield.
Yeah, I think it depends. If it's a one-off thing of something that hasn't been done in a long time, and they're just trying to do like a one-off update for a new generation, then I say you probably stick to the hits. But if it's like a continuing series of TV shows or movies, sequels, IPs, something like that, then I'm completely in the opposite direction. And I'll get into this with Star Wars when I talk about that with the Acolyte. I want something different. Give me something I haven't seen before. I think one of the big problems with Hollywood right now in general is it seems like everything is either a remake, a sequel, a continuation of intellectual property. Like, give me something original, either completely original, like I've never seen it before, or a completely new take on a franchise or movie or a character that I am familiar with. That's what I want.
Then give Garfield credit, because that's what they tried to do. It just didn't hit with me.
They didn't hit. So what is your give me your rating of Garfield?
3 out of 10.
Ooh, what about for your kids? Because I assume they were more the intended audience than you were.
For my 12-year-old, I would give it a 6 out of 10. For my 8-year-old, I'd give it an 8 out of 10.
Oh, wow. So they enjoyed it.
Because he liked it. My youngest son really liked it, and that's why we were there.
Yes, absolutely.
Because we were there for him, and he enjoyed it. And don't get me wrong, they had some songs, They put this through AI. They know what they're going for. They did their thing.
And what do you think about do you have any other reviews?
I don't. I mean, it's pretty sad that I only saw the Garfield. I'm really excited to hear the Star Wars review
Oh
from
yeah,
you. So
so
knock yourself out, man.
all right, without further ado, The Acolyte. It is the new Star Wars show. The first 2 episodes are out on Disney Plus. New episode out every Tuesday, I think. So I've
Tuesday.
seen the first two. I think I said this last week with Star Wars TV shows, live action TV shows. There's kind of like an A side and a B side. The A side are Andor, which is phenomenal. And I also would put The Mandalorian season 1 in there as well, which was really good.
It was well
And
done.
even part of season 2 was pretty well done. And everything else is kind of like in the B side of either mid, as the kids say, or complete trash, somewhere in between there. The Acolyte so far through 2 episodes, I think, is somewhere in between those two groups, but it's leaning more toward the B side, certainly, than it is Andor. So it's set about 100 years before the episodes, the events of the Phantom Menace. In the High Republic era, Brian, I'm sure you're familiar with that era of Star Wars lore. So this is basically when the Jedi, ruled.
Sure.
Yeah, right. So I think this is the first show then or movie that has taken place outside of the timeline of the 9 episodes, the 9 films, which I like. Again, something different. Great. Give me something different. So I like that. Another thing I like about the show is it's got a murder mystery kind of feel to it. I like that. Again, that's a little different in Star Wars. The problem is they tell you pretty much right away who committed the murders or who is committing the murders and kind of why, a little bit about why they want to, although they don't get into all the details. So that kind of, to me, if you're going to do a mystery, a murder mystery, build a little suspense, right? That's what I would like to see. Also, the problem with this movie is look, this show is so far, although they are trying to do some creative and interesting things, it's still very kind of superficial. It kind of fits into that mold of more, I would almost call it kid-centered, like a lot of the other Star Wars show, as opposed to the more adult-oriented storylines of Andor. And that's probably who it's for. It's probably not for me. I don't hate it because, again, I think there are some things to like there. There's some good action sequences, but it doesn't feel alive in the way that Andor did. And I think, and I was trying to think about why is that? Like, why do I see this movie or this show in a way that I've seen a lot of Star Wars post the original trilogy? And I think the reason is because it's centered so much on Jedi. And that's the thing about this show is there's so much Jedi. And the Jedi just aren't that cool. And I think about Andor. There's no Jedi in Andor. None. Even the first season of The Mandalorian, no Jedi. And so I think Star Wars is better when kind of like the Jedi are either in the background, or if you're going to bring them in, do something different with them. Make it more interesting. Get me into the world a little bit more. And I feel like this show, at least so far, hasn't really done that. And again, I want to be clear. I don't hate it. It's not terrible. It's kind of just,
See, in the scenario that you're bringing up, I am the 8-year-old boy going to see Garfield. So I love the Jedi. You know what I mean? It's like I'm not as deep into the lore as you are. So for me, I just like the cool parts. And to me, the Jedi are the cool parts.
To me, and I want to be clear, the Jedi used to be the cool part for me too, but I feel like it's just almost a diminishing return because we've just been there, done that. And that's what I was saying earlier with all these kind of IP sequel remakes is I feel like we're just going back to the well. There was a really good article in the New York Times that I just read it a day or two ago, but it actually came out in April. And it was one of the TV critics for the Times. And he said, this is the era of mid TV. Peak TV was what they called the era with like The Sopranos and The Wire and Mad Men and Breaking Bad. That was known as peak
TV. The golden era.
Now he talks about mid TV, and the point is it's a really good article. It's a great article. But the point he makes is there really isn't anything bad anymore. Everybody's too good. the acting, the writing, the producers, too
Right.
much money's being put in. It's really hard to make something bad where there used to be a lot of bad TV. But the downside of that
What was
is,
bad TV? I want to like, what
wow, I
would you
mean,
have considered bad
pretty
TV?
much 90% of sitcoms in the 80s and 90s, I would say, were bad.
Wow.
At least probably half the dramas. I mean, there was a lot of bad TV.
You know,
But
sometimes I fall asleep and Charmed comes on. And I've never seen Charmed before, but I gotta say, a lot of beautiful ladies on that show. I think that's why it had a following.
oh,
I don't think the
that was
stories were very good, but it was Alyssa Milano.
yes, they were witches or
They
something.
were
Is that what it
witches,
was?
but like I because my volume is all the way off, so like it's on mute, and I'll just look up, and I actually thought to myself, I know why people watch this show,
So
but I don't
you are
think it was a
sitting.
good show.
So you're sitting in your bed late at night or your couch watching Charmed reruns.
No, no,
This is what
no.
you're
I
telling.
fall asleep with YouTube on, and sometimes it'll just like select a random channel that was like on
Oh,
before, and like I think Charmed is on like TNT, so maybe I was watching like a basketball game, and then like Charmed will be in like reruns on in the
I don't know.
morning.
This
But anyway,
story is getting.
but my larger question
I,
was, I'm asking you, I'm asking like, what was like a bad TV show? Like,
oh
what
my
was
God,
bad?
I mean,
I
True
mean,
Blood
aside
is
from
just what.
obvious, like what?
True Blood was pretty bad, especially
Stop
after the
it!
first
How
season.
dare you?
It got
First
really
season of
bad.
True Blood is fantastic.
The first season's pretty good. After that, it went down the rabbit hole. I mean,
It
back
jumped
in
the
the
shark.
what was the show that? I mean, there's so
You think
many
True
bad
Blood was
shows.
bad?
Yes,
I
the
wouldn't say
show
True
that
Blood was bad. That's not
the sh-
fair.
the show that Joey did after Friends, the
Well,
Joey
Joey, that was the name of the
character. Yeah,
show.
there you go. There was a lot of bad TV.
Anyway,
But my
I
point
interrupted you. I
my
was just
point
curious.
is, I think one of the issues with TV now is they don't take a lot of swings, and so it limits the upside. And I think that's true with the Acolyte. It's just a lot of the stuff we've seen before. Although I want to give them credit because there is some stuff that you could kind of see where they are trying to do things a little bit different. And again, I'm not opposed to Jedi stories. It's just if you're gonna do it, make it interesting. I've seen lightsabers before. I know the Jedi by their nature are just stoic. It's like, well, we can't have emotion. We can't have love. Like that's kind of their thing, right? Those things cloud our judgment. So I would watch The Acolyte if I were you. I think it's worth checking out. But
Are you going to watch the new Star Wars? Did you see they're going to have Daisy Ridley back 15 years
Yeah,
after the thing?
I mean,
I was listening to
I'll watch
Smartless
it.
today, and I didn't know they were going to do a new Star Wars. That's interesting.
Yeah, they're gonna do it. What based and apparently it's going to take some of the storylines we're seeing from some of the shows, particularly Ashoka, and then also fill in some of the gaps in the storytelling between Return of the Jedi and then whatever mess
Do you
episode
think
7
people will
was.
have Star Wars fatigue? Because I think
Oh,
it'll make
absolutely.
a gazillion dollars.
I think people have Star Wars fatigue for sure, and I think Disney knows that, and that is why. And it's the same thing with Marvel. They know they've got to turn the ship around on both of those franchises because they know that the quality has slipped and the interest has slipped. I mean, just go look at the box office gross of the more recent movies and both of those franchises.
I just think those
look
major
at the
tent poles,
reception.
they always come back.
Oh, well, that's the thing. They're one hit away. They're
Right.
one great hit away from coming back. And for Marvel, Wolverine and Deadpool, is that what it's called?
Yeah.
That could be it. I
Sure.
mean, that could be it. Those two guys, in the lead, that could be it. For Star Wars, I don't know what it's going to be. I don't think it's going to be this. I should be Andor.
They need a Chewbacca movie. If they had a Chewbacca movie, everyone would go to that.
Well, I will say they teased at the end of episode 2 of The Acolyte that one of the key characters is a Jedi Wookiee.
Fantastic.
Which,
Come on.
so that alone will make me too.
Now I'm going to watch it because that's awesome.
But so I was talking about that article. I grabbed this part because I thought I might bring this up. So I won't read you the whole article, but I would go check it out. If you, I don't know if you subscribe to the New York Times online, but this is I'll just be interested in your thoughts on this. I'll read briefly a brief excerpt from his article. He said, these shows, meaning the mid shows that he's talking about, don't have what it takes to be truly bad. Making honestly bad TV requires a mercenary disregard for taste or a hell-bent willingness to take the kind of gamble that can turn into a disaster. Mid TV, on the other hand, almost can't be bad for some of the same reasons that keep it from being great. It's often an echo of the last generation of breakthrough TV. So the highs and lows of Game of Thrones, for instance, are succeeded by the faithful adequacy of House of the Dragon. Or it's made by professionals who know how to make TV too well and therefore miss a prerequisite of making great art, which is training yourself to forget how the thing was ever done and thus coming up with your own way of doing it. Mid is not a strict genre with a universal definition, but it's what you get when you raise TV's production values and lower its ambition. It reminds you a lot of something you once, I screwed that line up. It reminds you a little of something you once liked a lot. It substitutes great casting for great ideas. To me, that line really hit. It reminds you a little of something you once liked a lot. I really find that a lot with a lot of the TV I like. There's very few things I watch that I absolutely hate, but man, I miss jumping out of my seat with like Game of Thrones or the scene in like Breaking Bad where, you know, Walter is arguing with his wife and he's describing when the guy was killed and he remember the scene. He's like, "You think that of me? No, I am." What does he say? "I am the man who knocks." You know, those kind of moments. There are still shows that hit those beats sometimes. Succession, I think, was obviously one of the most recent examples. I think The Bear in season 2 had a couple of episodes that hit that level, but I just don't see it a lot anymore. And I just think this article kind of sums up maybe it kind of puts words to what kind of I was thinking and does it in a way a lot more articulately than I would.
What is this gentleman's name?
Oh, that's a good question. Stand by. I will effort that for you.
Well, regardless, my larger point is he's excellent with words, as he should be as a writer for the New York Times. But I want to take what he said and kind of go through it here and just say, I don't like, he says, how House of the Dragon is adequate. And the reason that I don't like the word adequate, because it suggests that because of the success of Game of Thrones, that it can't be outstanding on its own regard. That's like saying Better Call Saul couldn't be any good because Breaking Bad was such a great show. I don't think that's a fair assessment. The other thing I would say is that it's easy to be critical of things. And like I said, this guy's obviously good with words. And I think that, you know, I understand his point, but I would challenge him to go create something original on his own, write it, and then produce it, and then cast it, and then make it, and then see if it's any good. Because look, I tend to view through the prism of like, if I were on the business side of this, and I know people just want to be fans, and that's fair, but I try and come outside of my fandom and think about it from the perspective of, if I'm an executive and I have a property like Game of Thrones and it's super popular and it's made my network a lot of money, I'm probably going to go, you know what we should do, guys, is we should make another show that's just like Game of Thrones.
Right.
Because it's not going to make as much money, but it's going to make half as much money. And if I produce it for this amount and I know I'm going to make this amount, I know I'm going to make money. That's called being risk averse.
Yep.
Right? Why would I take a risk and try and make it $1 billion show and have it fail completely when I know I can just take this property? Dude, it's why we're going to get Superman movies and Batman movies and Marvel movies and Star Wars movies and Garfield movies and all this intellectual property. Until the day we die, those things will exist, because people that are making these decisions know that they have a built-in audience, that if it's not very good, people are still going to pay to see it. And if it's great, they're going to be rich.
The man's name is James Poniewozik, and the article is called, it's from the New York Times from April 27th, "The Comfortable Problem of Mid-TV."
Yeah, I respect what he's saying. I really
and
do.
If you
ask me my
you need to
thoughts.
read the article. It's
no,
quite
I'll
lengthy.
read it because it makes total sense. But like, dude, not everything is going to be The Wire. Like, and here's the thing that people forget is that The Wire was not that popular. it didn't get a ton of viewers. It was critically acclaimed and later became great. I always think of the movie
Right.
Office Space with Mike Judge. The movie Office Space, if you don't remember, there's a gentleman named Milton. He has a stapler. It's about a guy who doesn't want to go to work anymore. When that movie came out, it went to the theater and people were like, Jennifer Aniston coming outside of Friends, like doing a movie. Jennifer Aniston was barely in that movie. But my point of saying that is like it didn't do great at the theater. It didn't have great buzz. Dude, that is one of the greatest movies ever made. I swear to God, it's a top
so
100 all time. It is comedically perfect. It is so well done. Every line, it's so quotable. Everything that movie is just chef's kiss perfect.
No, I share your love for that movie, and I just watched it about a year or two ago, and it holds up. It stands the test of time.
Dude, but you get what I'm saying. Office Space didn't make any money for anybody, but it's probably a top 100 film legitimately of all time. But Garfield is going to make 18 times what Office Space made. So, I mean, the guy's honestly not saying something profound. I think that's my biggest issue with what he's saying is like, yeah, you're right.
Well, yeah. So the point, and look, the main, there's a lot of different, he goes into pretty much every corner of this topic, but the main thrust is what you said. Clearly, we all know this is driven by profit. A lot of it's driven by the switch to streaming and the need to try to make it profitable. We get that. The question is, what does that leave us? Does it, like you mentioned, The Wire? Would The Wire be made now?
No.
It doesn't check the box.
No, that's racist. Stop it.
Would Breaking Bad be made now?
Like maybe.
Because think about the greatest shows.
Who can I attach to it? That's the question.
Well, right. But think about the greatest shows like the last 20 years. Breaking Bad, Mad Men, The Sopranos, The Wire, Succession. None of these were sequels. None of them were remakes. None of them had intellectual property. None of them were part of a multiverse or you could sell merchandise with them. They didn't have that. And they were all, they're the greatest shows of all time. Is there space for those shows now? And again, to be clear, there still are some. Succession just ended. I think The Bear is really good, although I wouldn't put it in that level with that group of shows. But there just aren't as many now. There aren't as many shows.
It's because making Avatar is really hard. You know what I'm saying? Like, I know it's a movie and not a television show, but like, dude, they spent $1 gazillion making Avatar. And then they made Avatar the next one, and they were like, well, if it makes $2 billion, maybe we'll make another one. It's because creating that world and putting that all together, and there's one James Cameron. That's why it's so hard to do. I find my issue with critics, and I'm sorry to make this about me, is like, what have you created? What have you made? Like, what story have you told that has captured the imagination of tens of millions of people? It's like me going, you know what? I really don't like Harry Potter. It's just not for me. I don't really get it. Dude, it's Harry Potter. Like, I'm not a huge Harry Potter fan, but I respect what was done there.
You're like, you remind me of that Teddy Roosevelt quote. It's not the critic that counts, it's the man in the arena. That whole thing.
I don't know that speech, but I'm interested in it because
it's a great speech.
That's a Brian Johnson original. I really believe that. Like when
I know you do.
It's like when people are critical of professional athletes. Like, do you have any idea what this human being has put themselves through since childbirth to get into this moment? And then there's just some fat guy with Cheetos on his shirt going, he choked. He's a choker. Like, okay.
All right. I get what you're saying, but I think the thing that makes this interesting is it's not so much a critique of any one project.
No,
it's more a critique of the moment we're in. And it just rings true to me. Like, what's the last show that you watched that you thought, this is fantastic, and this gets me excited, and this is different and unique, and holy shit?
Here's my honest answer. Loki, the first season of Loki. I was so happy when that show came out, dude, because Tom Hiddleston is a great actor.
Yeah.
I thought he's a really unique character because he's an anti-hero. Like, he's not a traditional superhero. And the first season of Loki, I was just like, that was so fun for me, man. And I realized that Loki isn't in the same breath as like some of these other shows
No,
that we're
but the
talking
first
about.
season was really
But
good.
if you ask me, what did I enjoy more, Loki or Succession? I enjoyed Loki more than Succession personally. It's not that I didn't respect Succession or I didn't like it or I didn't think it was good. I thought Succession was great. I just did not enjoy it as much as I enjoyed Loki. So that's my answer to your question.
And I think that's look, Loki was really good, and I think WandaVision was really good.
Yes.
And WandaVision is what I'm talking about. If you're going to do IP and you're do something different with it, and they did in WandaVision. I don't know. I mean, you watch more of the Marvel shows than I do. Have there been since WandaVision and Loki, which came out what 3-4 years ago, and
Yeah.
were the OGs kind of the Marvel? Have any of the other Marvel shows been that good as WandaVision and Loki were?
No, but the one that people crap on all the time, which I've mentioned on this program before, was She-Hulk. I
You will
like that
you will
they
go
took
to your deathbed fighting for She-Hulk.
no,
I
no,
respect it. I
no,
respect it.
it's the thing where it's exactly what you're talking about. They didn't take the easy path. They made
Yeah.
it meta, and they had this really character that broke the fourth wall, and it was an original show. It wasn't super high budget. Yeah, like yes, it was a Marvel show, but I thought it was pretty well written, and I think it was pretty well acted. And I think if you enjoyed the original Hulk from like the 80s and you were a fan of that character, like I think that was a pretty good show. I'm in the minority here. Like I understand that. And
I've never
so
seen it, to be
people
fair.
know who are listening, like the second Captain Marvel movie was a disaster of unimaginable proportions. It was an embarrassment. Like it was so horrifically bad. So like I don't love every single thing, but in terms of original shows, the last original show that I was like, this is the best is Succession
Yeah.
for
All right.
sure.
That was a good discussion. Enjoyed it. I enjoyed it very much. Check out the Acolyte though. I think you might
I
like it,
will.
especially since you're a Jedi fan. Do you have any
I'll
final
wait till
thoughts
they're
for us
all
this
out.
week? Okay.
As a final thought, did you see that our friend Elon Musk, my friend, your friend, Elon Musk was going to ban iPhones from his where he employs people because of the agreement with OpenAI?
I did not see that.
Yeah. So
That
if
is
you get a
quite a
chance,
bold
check that
move.
out. Well, it's one of those things where I know that he employs 100,000 people, but it's also important to recognize that Apple sells 200 million iPhones a year. He was just
So
saying
so
that
he's not going to allow an iPhone into any of his
if
businesses?
the iPhone has the OpenAI as part of its feature, it's not going to be allowed on businesses that he owns. He won't allow Apple.
And why is that? Because I know because he owns an AI company. He's afraid they'll
Well, he
steal
does
trade
own an AI
secrets.
company, which is a lot of people pointed out when I was reading through that maybe he had a problem with it because Apple didn't make the deal with him. But basically, he's questioning the security feature. Actually, in fairness to Elon Musk, and I do like to pick on Elon because he's such a frumpy guy to make fun of, but and he paid way too much for Twitter, now X. Um, uh, I think that he actually has a good point here, which is funny, which is that there are so many unknowns with the security on the open
Yeah.
AI that it probably is worth someone raising their hand and going like, "Hey guys, are we sure?" But I think we're too far gone. I think it's already happening, and it's kind of like the internet. The cat's out of the bag. The horse has left the barn, and other cliches.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. I do feel like with AI, we are at the very tip of the iceberg and it is about to wash over us. Do icebergs wash over you? We're the
The
water. We're at the
glaciers?
edge. Yeah, the
I don't know
glacier's
the
about to melt.
metaphor. Whatever.
You know what I'm saying?
I do.
We don't realize what we are about to step into. That is what
I
I'm
think we
trying to
do.
say.
Do
And I
you?
think
Because I do.
no, I don't have a good handle on exactly where this is going to go and what the
Dude, I
potential.
can't wait. I'm going to just have AI do all my emails all day. I'm going to let it get the algorithm of my speech patterns, the way I speak, and the way I
Yes,
write. And
and
it's going to
just
have
let
all
it
the
do it.
information about my job that I've ever had. And people are going to send me emails and it's going to reply immediately with what my response would be. And I don't have to do anything. It's going to be fantastic.
Yeah, I don't think we're ready for the deep fakes,
No, we're not.
the potential espionage, security risks, the also way it's going to transform relationships
Oh yeah.
sexual and otherwise, with people having AI relationships, and also the way it's going to transform potentially the job market and displace
Oh, well, that's the
maybe
biggest one.
millions of jobs and
No, that's the
change
biggest
our
one.
way
Like
of
if
life
you write
completely.
grants, like if you're a grant writer and that's your job, you should start seeking other employment right now because I used AI to write grants for me this year.
Oh, really? And
Oh, 100%. Why would I
job.
not? No, they're
And
fantastic.
wow.
Dude, I used to spend, I mean, a week to like do the research and get everything together and make sure that I put it together properly and I filled out all the forms right. This year, I just plopped the thing into an AI and it took care of it. I was done in 5 minutes. I submitted it. It's fantastic.
Wow. Wow.
Why do
Not
I
to
need to
mention,
pay a grant writer? For what?
no, and that I'm not, no, you're right. And that doesn't even take into account, maybe it becomes self-aware and tries to kill us all. So, I'm just saying we haven't even,
I think
stepped
before we get to
into,
Judgment Day, I think your question on the job market is probably the largest one because it's certainly going to replace a lot of customer service.
yeah,
Because I
I
don't
think
know if you
so.
notice it, I interact with AI almost every day on a customer service forum of some kind. I know it's a silly example, but I recently bought tickets on StubHub to go to a baseball game, and unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to make it. I went right in the chat feature. I did not talk to a human being. It was all AI. It told me exactly what to do. I did it in a few minutes, and I sold my tickets to another person, and I was done. I didn't have to call India or America or anywhere else. I didn't have to talk to anybody to tell me what to do. I didn't have to read a manual. I just typed in a little box like, "Hey AI bot, like I bought tickets. I can't go to the game. What do I do?" And it just like, "Here, do this." And I did it, and it was great. Sold the tickets like the next day. Fantastic.
It's amazing. It's a whole new world that we are entering into. Thanks for listening, everyone. Make sure you follow us on Apple Podcasts. For Brian Johnson, I'm Eric Messersmith. We hope that you enjoyed the show, but if not, please take no offense.